Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. These are two of the courses that we offer for certification prep and recertification for HR leaders. You can learn more about these courses at Workology.com. Now, in this episode, we're talking about how to support employees who have experienced trauma in the workplace. Now, why would we do that? Well, it's important for HR to be able to support trauma in the workplace because unresolved trauma, whether it's from personal experience, work incidents, or broader social events, can deeply affect employee well-being, their performance, and retention. And we need to be equipped to recognize and respond with empathy and provide appropriate resources. We want to help create a psychologically safe environment where employees feel valued and supported. Now, this not only reduces absenteeism and turnover and also reduces burnout, but strengthens trust, engagement, and resilience across organizations. Ultimately, trauma-informed HR practices align business goals with human needs, making sure that the employee and the organization can thrive. So let's talk about how we can practice this. And that's why I have my guest today. Now, before I introduce our guest, I do want to hear from you, and you can comment on my Instagram. It's at Workology Blog. Go on over to my most recent post, send me a DM, leave a comment suggestion. I do want to hear from you. Today's guest today is Renée Robson, founder of Trauma-Informed Leadership, a social enterprise focused on helping organizations embed trauma-informed leadership and practice into their leadership culture and design. With a master's degree in management, her research centered on organizational drift and how leadership and design influence whether an organization lives its mission or slowly loses its way. Plus a postgraduate learning diploma, Renée is highly skilled as a trauma-informed educator in both organizational settings and also yoga and yoga practice, holding certifications in traumatic stress studies, including a certificate in traumatic stress studies and a TCTSYF credential. She has extensive yoga training and is specializing in creating a safer workplace that is more compassionate and rooted in psychological safety. Renée is originally from New Zealand and now based in Victoria, Australia. She has held leadership roles across nonprofit, healthcare tech, disability, mental health, and education sectors. She has led large organizations in an HR capacity and also learning and development functions, holding roles that head up disability and mental health profession and education, leading performance capacities in the Asia Pacific region, and directing organizational design at large YMCAs. Her mission is to transform workplaces by helping leaders adopt trauma-informed approaches that invite innovation, collaboration, well-being, and authentic leadership so our employees can flourish. Renée, welcome to the Workology Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jess. It's lovely to be here.
I know, just love that accent too. I get tired of the American accents. So I'm excited to have you here and just excited for you to share all that you're learning and working on, because it is, I think, truly going to change people's lives.
I feel very fortunate to do what I do. And it's funny, I woke up this morning and I was wearing a Sherm 16 shirt, and I think that that's where we first met.
That is. So we met at the Sherm National Conference, I guess in 2016, right? And we were both on, you were on the Blogger Squad then too? Yeah. And then every time she would come to the conference, we would hang out and have a good time. So, but we met first on Twitter.
Yeah, back in the old Twitter days.
I'm still calling it Twitter. I am holding steady. I am not going to call it that other name for sure. So I want to get into the conversation. So we're talking about trauma-informed leadership and how to support our employees in this area. And I think this is a new topic for many leaders, maybe one that they haven't heard a lot about. So for those who are unfamiliar, how do you define trauma-informed practice in the workplace?
I think about it really as the next level of authentic leadership. It's really taking what we know from neurobiology, from psychology, from social work, from somatic practices, and the huge amount of research that's been happening there that help us understand more about how people actually are rather than how we think they should be. Because how people actually are is people come to work with all of their experiences behind them. And it's silly to think that everyone's going to respond in the same ways to the same things. So, trauma informed practice is really using that thinking in the workplace, thinking about our leadership, our systems, and our policies, and how they help or hinder what we're trying to do.
Great. It's very helpful for people to set the stage. I also think that the words trauma informed leadership, and I'm using air quotes here, make it sound, I don't know, it's kind of like nonviolent communication, that strategy. Like, it's just not a set of words that authentic leadership is such, it sends a different message than trauma informed practices. But you have said that trauma informed leadership is really about understanding the nervous system and how that works. Talk to us about what that looks like in everyday workplace situations, because I think for many, this might be the first time that they have heard about the central nervous system at work.
Yeah, because our nervous system dictates so much of our experience, right? Like our emotional state, how quick we are to different reactions. And there is more and more practices happening now, particularly in psychology, where people are understanding, or there's general education around, I guess, how much those experiences play into what we're like in our lives and what paths we take, and also what careers we do and how we behave when we're there. Like all of those little pieces that taught us to respond how we individually respond. That's what trauma informed practice is about. It's really understanding what those things are individually, but then also when we get people together in groups, we've got to think in systems, and it applies there too.
So talk to us about the nervous system and what that is, maybe for someone who's not familiar with that. I mean, we're kind of going like back to old school anatomy, but why is that important for this
Yeah.
conversation?
So, our nervous system is really the key piece of our body brain connection. And I think in a lot of Western societies, we kind of have grown up thinking about like we're like a head or a brain on a body, and they're not really integrated. Our nervous system connects our brain with our body, and the autonomic nervous system has two states. So some people might be familiar with this. We have our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system, and it's really just two versions of how we might be. Sympathetic nervous system is when we need energy. Our body ramps it up. We get adrenaline. We can go do things. And to help us do that, our body does things like make our breathing faster. It will maybe send like energy around the body, and blood might pump faster, and our heart might increase. And the flip side of that is our parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called rest and digest. So that's the alternative state that we need to be able to kind of flex between the two, like be able to get our energy up and respond to things and run away from the tiger, or, get energy ahead of a big day at work, a big presentation or something. And then the flip is we also need to be able to move into our parasympathetic, where we have an opportunity to rest, relax, recalibrate, it's sleep, it's all of those good things that are really important for our mental health. And what we can often quite end up doing is spending a lot of our time, especially at work, in our sympathetic nervous system, which is helpful for getting things done, but it's also a lot closer to where maybe some of our automatic reactions and emotional responses might happen, because when we get into our sympathetic nervous system, that's also fight flight responses. And this is where at work you can go from, oh, I'm energized and I'm ready to do something, to, oh my gosh, this is a massive threat and I don't know what to do and I'm freaking out.
It's not always bad to be energized and freaking out. Sometimes those
No.
like things are good things. Like if you're going to give a big presentation, you need a little extra, energy to go in and make an impression. I think the challenge is when you're always operating in that state all the time, it doesn't give your body like you were saying, a chance to rest and digest, which is really important for productivity and just healthy living.
Absolutely. And like our ability to think as well, it absolutely need to get our energy up and be in that sympathetic state for lots of things with work. But we don't do our best work if we're just there. That's not where our best thinking happens. It's not where our best connection with other people happens. It's certainly not where creativity happens. So individually, we need to be able to have a healthy nervous system to flex in between that and our parasympathetic state. But also, if you think about if I'm managing a group or I'm leading an organization, it's silly to do that without considering all of those factors that might make people better or worse in different situations, or more productive or less productive, or more collaborative or less collaborative in groups. And that's really where trauma-informed thinking has a whole nother layer to add to the workplace, kind of beyond what lots of people might have heard of, where some organizations will deliver trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practice, maybe within social work, maybe within community settings, maybe in health, justice, children, youth, and family. So we've got a lot of workplaces that will be familiar with some of this language in terms of what they deliver, but not necessarily in terms of how their systems work. And then we also have lots of leaders that this is like an entirely new thing for too, right?
I think the last part is the part that I'm saying, like, this is a whole new thing, and kind of your approach needs to be a little bit more individualized, because we don't know where people are coming from, or how they can regulate their nervous system. Can they move? Do they feel safe at work? And are they pulling and pushing at the right times to be able, like you said, to be their most productive or creative selves? Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're operating in that running from the tiger phase, right? And we're doing that all the time.
Yeah. And it's so important to consider in the workplace. And I think sometimes I hear a little bit of, oh, I don't want to, I'm not a social worker, I'm not people's psychologist, I don't need to get involved in their stuff. I'm like, please don't do that. Like, I'm not advocating for anyone to go around and like ask people about their childhood trauma or something. Like, that's not what this is. What it is looking at the research and looking at practice and learning from organizations that have done this stuff really well and learning from researchers that have done this stuff really well and implementing things that we know that will work in your context. So rather than going, you need to suddenly be talking to people individually about their stories, it's really about how do we look at systems and leadership and our policy in light of this and maybe start to shift some of those practices.
So let's talk about maybe an example that I think a lot of people can relate to. And that is employees having the choice to maybe turn their camera off or on in meetings. How does this offer permission and maybe autonomy that supports engagement and inclusion in this area?
So there's two really interesting kind of schools of thought in this, and one I've heard quite a bit since COVID, which has been in some meetings or things, people will be encouraged to have their cameras on because it's trauma informed to see everyone that you're speaking to, which I appreciate, that sometimes that might be something that will make someone feel more or less comfortable if they can see someone visually if they're on a video call. However, that's about asking people to do something differently themselves, where often what we're doing in trauma-informed practice is thinking about modifying our own behavior rather than enforcing things on other people. So a trauma-informed way to look at that, I think, might be, considering neuroaffirming practice, considering that it is quite a toll for some people to visually be on all the time, especially if you're in back-to-back meetings all day. Considering what we know about psychology and people being like watched while they're at work and how that affects their performance, maybe it's more trauma-informed to say something like, cameras are really welcome on. However, if you want to have it off for a period of time, that's really okay too. And then you would just, lean into your good facilitation skills if you're facilitating people online by giving them different ways to interact. Like, people can put their hand up or people can talk in the chat and you know that they're engaged in both of those ways, right? Or you can do a little poll here and there to keep people involved if you're worried about people like not working with their camera on. But I would argue that usually the push against the camera being on, I would argue probably has a little bit more to do with control of the people managing the situation than really thinking about what's most helpful and what's going to give people the best chance of participating, which, if you're in the workplace, right, getting people to participate and do their job and get involved is really what we should be going for.
I agree. I just think it's kind of good for us to kick off, I think, an example that most of us might have interacted with or dealt with ourselves, but certainly we've likely all had that one manager who came into the office, or it ended up in our Slack DMs that says, I'm requiring cameras on and I want to write somebody up, or something's happening. So I think it's a good kind of way for us to maybe think about this from this lens.
And I would always, like, whenever I have those conversations, I think like the trauma-informed practice thing and the coaching opportunity is maybe more with the person that's requiring
Yep.
cameras to be on or requiring the control, because that might speak a little bit more to their nervous system state and where they're feeling anxious and where they're feeling like they need to get that out than maybe the participation of the person involved. And of course, if someone's not participating and not doing their job, that's a whole nother conversation, right? But if we're just talking about someone's camera being on or off, it's a little bit maybe not worth the price for someone's participation and comfort to be able to be there.
So when we were on the prep call, we talked about this example that I really loved, just to give everybody some context. We talked about an example actually from a Facebook group from Suzanne Lucas, the evil HR lady. And there was a question from someone who was talking about a uniform request. And so the employee has a sensory issue and they wanted to wear the summer shirt, like work shirt, instead of like the winter fall work shirt. So when we talked about this, I thought this was super interesting. And so I wanted to ask you, how does a trauma-informed lens reframe accommodations like this one that we're talking about, both as an empathy and as a productivity issue?
Love this conversation because it's such a good example of something where we could make a really, really easy adjustment that has massive business and interpersonal benefit. For the person asking for the accommodation, it's a really big deal, right? Like if something's irritating them to the point where they're asking for a different shirt, big deal, probably going to really get in the way of them being able to do their job if it's irritating them that much. For the HR person or the business, it's a really small deal solution. They're not asking to wear like a chicken suit. They're asking to wear like a summer uniform shirt. Like it'll be fine, right? So, but the payoff for that person is enormous in terms of loyalty, but also for the business. Because if you think about the implication of someone being like constantly kind of irritated in their job, that pushes you so much closer to where your stress responses are and pushes you further away from where you collaborate, where you're creative, where you're relational and being able to connect with other people. So there is only upside for the business there, which is quite a different conversation than like, are they allowed to do this because of their sensory issue, right?
It's funny that we didn't mention like the Americans with Disabilities Act in this conversation. Granted, you're in Australia, not the United States. I know there's employment laws over there that are similar, but this isn't just about a reasonable accommodation because of the law. It is more than that, and maybe easier than that. Like the answer is simple.
So simple.
It's interesting to me, and I think that's something that we need to be thinking about more of. I mean, just as a human, like being uncomfortable just in life is not fun. And if we can just make one small change, just let the guy or the gal wear their summer uniform. Like you said, they're going to be grateful. They're going to be more productive and just in a better mental space.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not about removing all triggers or all irritations for everyone, because like that's impossible and that would be like too difficult for anyone to do, right? But if there are things that we know will make a real difference and there's not a downside, why wouldn't we?
I just personally think it took a lot for that person to just stand up and just say something and ask for the request. And so for that reason, like it should be taken seriously, not
Mm.
shut down or making them pay for another uniform or some of the crazy options that I saw in the Facebook group. It's like, just
Yeah.
let the person have the shirt, and everything will be fine.
Absolutely. When the conversation becomes about how effectively can you micromanage the answer rather than is the thing that's being requested reasonable, I think you're having then it's more a conversation about what are these people's stress responses that they're so fixated on controlling this inconsequential thing for somebody else. Like, interesting.
That, and I will say that, like what you've just said, that happens so often. It is somebody else's stress response that we're accommodating to these things, like the cameras on scenario, or hey, no one you only must wear what you must wear. It's that's the manager or the leader who's making the decisions. Stress response.
Yeah. It's
Coming
often
through.
so much more about power than it is what's actually most helpful to get the job done or have this thing be achieved. Because if that's how we're framing things, like, how am I going to create the environment where this work gets done? Well, the answer to that is never, I'm going to be a micromanager and be a bit of a D-bag to my employees. Like, that's the opposite of what that is. Am
I
I
had
allowed to say
somebody tell
D-bag?
you can say whatever you want. This is our show here. I had somebody actually say to me recently that they were proud that they were a micromanager. And I understand that from their perspective, it was like, hey, I'm proud of my business and I love my business. It's really important to me. But at some point, it's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for your people.
No, because you very rarely talk to anybody that's worked for a boss that was a micromanager and they talk about that was the thing that they liked about them, right? Like that was the thing that made my workplace really great or made me better at my job. It's usually that was really stressful.
Absolutely. Let's take a little reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, powered by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. Today, we're talking with my friend Renée Robson, founder of Trauma-Informed Leadership, about how we can support trauma at work. Let's talk about trauma-informed practices and how they connect to psychological safety, which is a term that I've talked about and I'm hearing more and more, which I'm frankly excited that we're talking about this. Talk about why psychological safety is so foundational to team performance.
So you just have to ask Google. They have put a lot of effort into this, into figuring out what makes the highest performing teams the highest performing teams. And the answer is psychological safety. So it is people knowing that they can try things and it's safe. They know that they can be creative and it's safe. One of the really good tests for psychological safety is if you have a group of employees in the room, can the most junior person say an idea or something kind of a little bit off the wall, and are they going to have negative ramifications for that, or is it going to be okay with the most senior person? Such a good test. So we know that it's really, really related to performance. We know it's really related to creativity and collaboration. In Australia, we actually have a legal requirement to provide psychosocial safety for our employees, which means that we also have to look at the systems that we have set up and how they might create or hinder people having psychological safety, which is a pretty cool advent, if you ask me. I think that there is a gap or room for improvement in how we look at it. Often we talk about psychological safety from a pure health and safety or risk kind of focused lens, like we need to not have harm done. And absolutely, we want to not have harm done, but there is so much benefit in terms of creativity and performance for us to really cultivate it. And I've found the most helpful way to cultivate it is by talking about psychological safety as a felt sense. So this is where I take off my HR hat and I put my yoga teaching hat on, because safety is a feeling. It's not something that you have on the wall. Like, you and I can go into the same room in the same environment and I might feel cues there that make me feel safe. I don't know. Maybe I know the organizers of the event, or maybe I've been in this room before and I know where the exits are and I feel okay here. But maybe it's new for you, and maybe that you didn't get that feeling as you came in. So our sense of safety in that space is going to be really different from each other, right? Same as all employees, same as all humans. So once we get our heads around the idea that safety is a felt sense and that we all have different experiences that lead us into interactions, we're going to feel that in different ways. So it means you start thinking about cultivating safety as something that's relational. And so it's about your leadership. It's about your policy. It's about your structure. It's not about the list of things that you tell people not to do on the wall. Like, that's great, but that doesn't create safety. That just maybe inhibits hazard. It's different.
I feel like the underlying theme here is leadership and them creating a kind of an inclusive environment that allows for people to come where they are.
Well, think about how much of people's mental well-being is influenced by their manager. Like, there was a UKG study a couple of years ago, and it put managers at 69% influence over people's mental health, which was, I think, as much as their partner and maybe more than a mental health professional that they had supporting them. So managers have huge influence over people's mental health at work and then obviously outside of work. So by supporting managers to create psychosocial safety, like, leaders and HR really can make a massive shift in terms of how people experience the workplace, but then also that's inherently tied to their productivity and their creativity and their ability to do the job and support the customers or clients of that business in the way that people actually want it done, because people need to feel safe and empowered to do that. And teaching leaders how to create psychological safety is, I think, the number one requirement to do it.
I absolutely agree with you. That's why we're here talking about this, because more people need to hear what we're saying. Talk to us about the window of tolerance and how stress responses like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn might show up in the workplace.
This is always, when I go in and do workplace training, this is always a big topic of conversation. So if you haven't heard of the window of tolerance, it's a good one to Google. It's a psychological concept that's really about where our energy and our activation is, and it kind of describes the middle zone as the ventral vagal zone. The middle zone is where we are creative. It's where we can connect with people. It's where we feel safe. It's like where we get into flow. And that is also, if we go back to what we were talking about with the nervous system before, that's often like around our parasympathetic nervous system state, our rest and digest. When we get above that, we have more energy, we go into our sympathetic nervous system state. And that is where people tend to go into one of two stress responses, which is fight or flight. So if I'm inclined, based on my life experiences and all the things I've learned, to go into fight, my energy goes up, my nervous system goes up, and I might trip into a fight response. Someone else might go into a flight response. On the flip side, when our energy goes down, we go into a dorsal vagal space. So that is where, think about the deer running from the tiger. It's going to go into its flight response. The tiger catches it. It might flip into its freeze response. And its freeze response is where it plays dead. So we really are like winding down our entire system. It's a survival response, right, to keep alive. But so freeze is another response that people might flip into when they're faced with stress. The fourth one is the one that we often don't talk about, which is fawn. Some people might describe these behaviors like people-pleasing behaviors, and we often see it show up in the workplace, where someone has learned that the best way to stay out of danger and stay out of trouble is by preempting what people want to stay safe. So that might be someone looks a bit angry and they go, okay, I need to give them what they need so I stay safe. So maybe that's a manager, maybe that's a bully, but we can have people will flip into that response where they then don't advocate for themselves and just kind of give to stay safe. So those four responses show up all the time in the workplace, right? And all of us with our individual life experiences, we're capable of going into all of them, but we tend to go into a couple. And this is where you'll see in the workplace quite often people talk, that person always flies off the handle, when they're caught unaware, or this person seems to disappear when things get like, oh my goodness, it's their stress response. So if we start thinking about it being a stress response and an absence of safety, it really changes the way that we talk about it and maybe the things we might do to be able to re-engage. Whether we're interested in empathy and values or whether we're just Machiavelli and we want to make money, thinking about those things are helpful when we're talking about a group of people in an organization.
I was thinking about like workplace scenarios or situations where I've seen all of those. And the one that keeps coming back to me is like when I'm delivering like corrective action with somebody. And so talking about like performance, or maybe we're delivering a PIP, and people will respond to the feedback or, policy violation or whatever in really one of those few ways. And you'll start to notice, it's crazy. Like once you start seeing that, we start talking about this, you are going to notice patterns of your people. And it is helpful to understand their potential response. It's not your responsibility to keep them or save them from those responses. But if you're aware, you can, I think, better plan for what happens next.
Absolutely. And it is funny when you start seeing it, you do see it everywhere. And by being able to change just small things in your own behavior and how you interact with people as you see them getting into those places, it really can change outcomes. Like it can change it massively. And like you say, it's not about saving them or stopping that outcome or anything. I think it's really important with trauma-informed practice to consider our scope of practice. If I'm here as an HR person, if I'm here as a manager, I'm not here as someone's psychologist, but I can use understanding about humans and how they respond to things to maybe like set it up in a way that, I don't know, we've got a better chance of getting a good outcome. Crazy.
If anything from this conversation, and especially this last part, I would say think about your response, like how you typically respond to things. Because once I saw it, I was like, holy cow. So that when you are responding to a situation and it becomes one of those, all you have to say is, hey, what's going on here? In my head, that's what I say to myself. Hey, what's going on here? And then maybe it's just giving yourself a minute to get grounded or centered or breathe or remove yourself from the room, so that you can just come back maybe later, and maybe you'll respond in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what's been really helpful for me about understanding that window of tolerance, because you kind of then can see yourself, like, where am I in this? Am I getting escalated? And then understanding also how our nervous systems interact with each other. Like, we are not separate in this. When you go into a room with someone with a dominant nervous system, like, you'll tend to sink into what they're doing, right? So as a manager or as an HR professional kind of commanding a room or taking a group through things, you understanding that how you respond and how your nervous system is responding will genuinely influence the room without even any words being said. It's not about your reaction, it's about the energy in the room. And it sounds woo-woo, but it's like, it's legit. Go read a paper.
Or just go speak at an event. And if you come in with like good intentions and you're like, I'm going to kill it, everything's good, they're all going to feel great, you can influence that room. But if you come in and you're thinking bad things, or you're really nervous and you're letting the anxiety take over, other people will respond to those things too. That's why acting is a whole profession, right? Like you can influence and change the energy of how the people respond to you. Or just have a teenager like I do, and you can see it every day.
It's the real test of the window of tolerance.
Yes, I was just talking to her about like her response, like her stress response in swimming. She's a swimmer. And so working on like how she prepares for when she, dives into the water, and like the mental preparation, and then what happens, because really kind of just go into autopilot, but there's a lot of what you can do. And I was like, maybe you have a regular pattern that you just need to be aware of. She's more open to that than she's ever been. So I know she's listening. It's just sometimes hard to get there.
And I think also we all access that kind of parasympathetic state in different ways. Like, I teach trauma-informed yoga, but there are lots and lots of different practices. And I mean, any elite sport, people are learning about their nervous system state and learning about, okay, so what do I do with my breath? What do I do with my mind to help me access that state better? It is the same and when people are going through trauma therapy. It's learning about, well, what are the signals within my body that help me learn that I'm safe, or what can I do to help shift this? And it's fine-tuned, right? And it's different for everybody. So a lot of it is trial and error and figuring out, well, what works for me? That my best bit of advice with it is a lot of people get a nice calm down with breath, right? So you teach breath work. Like breath
Mhm.
work is incredible and it's incredibly powerful. But also for some people that have had traumatic experiences, breath work can be really activating and the opposite. So just because taking a deep breath works for me, I would never say to someone, oh, you're stressed. Take a deep breath now, because your access to your nervous system and your responses are going to be different to mine. And I don't want to, tell you to do something that's actually going to escalate things. The
Yeah, we don't
opposite.
want that. Hopefully they'll be curious and they can try, and then you can have awareness where you're like, this isn't working. Go do something else. I
Yeah.
I often say that in my yoga classes. Like, if child's pose is not for you, head on over to something that does. It
Yeah.
doesn't hurt my feelings at all if you end up leaving the room, or you just stay laying down with a blanket over your head. I'm like, good for you for knowing what you want and need.
Well, isn't that the beauty of the choice thing, right? So we talked about the choice of someone having a different shirt at work that might make them feel more safe. It's the same where we can engage our brain in small choices to kind of make ourselves more comfortable. We create new neural pathways when we do that, particularly we've experienced chronic stress or we've experienced trauma, making small choices about, oh, this feels more comfortable, whether that's doing child's pose in yoga class or whether that's wearing a different shirt because of sensory needs. Actually taking that action and making that choice creates new neural pathways and is a pathway to healing and integration in our brains. So I know we're not talking about like healing people at work from trauma. It's not what I'm advocating, but there are so many wonderful benefits to allowing just a little bit more choice in what we do.
And the bigger picture is the culture shift and what that allows for your organization that I don't think we often are thinking about.
And you just need to talk to anyone about like the most transformational leader or the workplace that really changed things for them, that allowed them to kind of come into their own. And you hear really familiar things when people talk about this. You hear about trust, you hear about choice, you hear about collaboration. And I think we sometimes think about those things like they are qualities that some leaders just happen to have or not, or some qualities that workplaces have or not. And they're not. They're It's just practice. It's just the rules we set up and how we expect people to behave with each other and the expectations we set and the kind of conversation that we have around whether, like, how central is safety? How important is it that our employees feel safe at work for them to be able to do their jobs? And that's not just about tripping over a cord. That's also about, like, do they feel safe to say, like, kind of a crazy idea in front of their boss that they think might work? Or are they worried that their boss is going to smack them down for it really quickly?
Mm.
Because that's your psychological safety test, right?
Final question for you, and I want to think about HR leaders for this. Maybe they're wanting to integrate trauma informed practices in their workplace. What's one actionable, maybe small step that they can take tomorrow to begin implementing this at the workplace?
I think there are two things. Can I
Okay.
have two
Of
things?
course.
So one is really just learning a little bit more about trauma informed practice, like literally just going, well, what is one thing that I can do that might implement? So it might be something that we've spoken about, it might be giving someone slightly more choice in something. That is awesome. Like that is a step towards trauma informed practice. And I would encourage you to do that, learn a little bit more about it. That would be really cool. The second thing is we can't start it if we're not starting with ourselves.
Mhm.
So it is very hard to be the kind of leader that's going to be able to read the room and to understand where people are coming from with different experiences and different nervous system responses if we're not familiar with our own.
Yes.
Um, so that might look really differently for lots of different people. Like for some people, that might be their alone time when they're fishing. For someone else, it might be doing yoga or meditation or journaling or something. But just knowing that we need to continue that work for ourselves to keep integrating to be able to help others or implement something in an organization.
This is all great. So spend some time with yourself and something that helps you regulate your nervous system. And I think that's a great place to start. Great place to start. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work you're doing, Renée?
I am on LinkedIn, more than happy to connect with people there. And they can also find me at traumainformedleadershipandlearning.com. My work, I work as a social enterprise, so I do a lot of education for free, particularly with volunteers and nonprofits. And you can also find me on Instagram. There's a little bit more trauma-informed yoga there as well, if you're at all interested in that.
We'll link to all the resources in the show notes if you want to just go directly there. But it's been a pleasure. Like, I just love talking to you about these topics. And it's so fun to see you in that space doing that thing. And then for me to also be kind of parallel on my own journey. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Same, yeah. I love what you do with integrating the yoga stuff in the workplace. It is just awesome.
More to come, more to come.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jess.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Workology Podcast and for listening in on the conversation with Renée Robson about trauma-informed leadership and how we can create a safer, more compassionate workplace. I hope you're walking away with some new ideas on how HR and people leaders can support employees in meaningful ways and build cultures that truly thrive. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the Workology Podcast so you don't miss future conversations. You can learn more about Renée and her work at traumainformedleadershipandlearning.com. And as always, thank you for being a part of the Workology community, where we are elevating the HR role together. Thank you again for joining the Workology Podcast. It is sponsored by Upskill HR and Ace the HR Exam. This podcast is for the disruptive and regulated workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell. Until next time, visit Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes. Have a great day.